Can I invite some contributions, thoughts, questions, Juk?
Thank you very much, Cecile, for this talk. You were not present, so it's good.
I didn't see.
I have a few questions. Actually, I appreciate very much the effort to bring Simondon to other domains of thought and how to renew the thinking of Simondon. But at the same time, I think that we have to precise some of the concept of Simondon, which I found a bit unclear, and maybe you can explain. First of all, the concept of trans-individuation, which is a term that Simondon didn't use. Simondon used trans-individual or trans-individuality, but not trans-individuation, neither in du mode nor in l'individuation à la formation. Trans-individuation is the term used by Bernard Stiegler.
Yes.
So I think that they would be really careful. And secondly, with the term
first mutation.
Trans-individual is a term that I think we have to really precise on that. There are two occasions where, because I have written a lot on this already, there are two occasions that the term trans-individual was invoked. The first one is in the principal thesis when Simondon talked about Zarathustra. I don't know if you remember this passage when Simondon says that when Zarathustra encountered the loop dancer, when the loop dancer fell down and died, was dying, Simondon approached him, and of course they had a little conversation, and then the guy died. Simondon carried the body to bury him. And Simondon says at this moment that the trans-individuation, there is a trans-individual relation emerged that is also the source of friendship and brotherhood. Here, there is the trans-individual relation comes out because well, he used this example to say that there is also trans-individual relations in solitude, in the solitude of Zarathustra. And this the trans-individual relation emerged because of the living being is not able to resolve a problem which is physiological, and at this point he moved towards a psychic collective, a psychic individual. So the question is, can we take the should we limit the concept of the trans-individual relation to psychical beings, or should we extend it to technical object? Now the second part where he mentioned about that, which justifies what you have said, is in du mode, where he says that technical object also carries trans-individual relations. So
Can I say that again? There?
In du mode, he says that the technical object also carry trans-individual relations, and there is a relation between trans-individual relation and information. But when he says that the technical object carried trans-individual relations, it seems to me that he's still talking about the support of technical object as carrier of trans-individual relations.
The medium that bears an imprint.
Exactly. But if you agree with me, the trans-individual relations are still referred to psychic beings.
Yes.
No?
Human beings, yes.
Not psychic. So there's no trans-individual relation between technical objects.
Yes.
Yeah. So that because at point I understood that you are kind of saying that there is trans-individual relations in noise changing, so on and so forth. So I think it has to be clarified. Then the second part
Can I just, before you make the second point, just because that's very quick.
Yeah.
So the technical reality I say reality rather than object because in this sense it is not entirely clear how this network of algorithms can be defined as an object necessarily, although it certainly also has a physical kind of presence in reality, is a medium, and that's a concept that's very important for me at the moment. So it receives the imprint of this pre-individuality that we share, that Zarathustra shares with a tightrope dancer, for instance.
Yeah.
It's the moment that our individuality falls away, that we share this residual, the human nature, which is the residual pre-individual within all of us, the potential to individuate. That's what we share with others in friendship and in love, I guess. This is how I interpret it.
It's a carrier. So, for example, a book, we can all read the same book. You know? So, the book in this case carries transindividual relations that, for example, the book of Simondon.
It becomes a mediator,
Because if this table is not stable, what was Simondon's book? Just to keep it stable. It's no longer have the same kind of transindividual relations that we can.
Yes.
No. So this is the first point about concept. The second is that I'm not really sure also about that we can talk about the p-individual of technical object.
No, what I found interesting was the question that if the technical reality becomes the medium that bears the imprint of human nature, this act of invention that is driven by what is unresolved within each of us, and we're obviously all different, we have different eye color, we have different hair, I think, but we have the same pre-individual potential within us. So that is something we all share, on the basis of which we have different individual properties. And this is what I thought was fascinating and paradoxical, is that the imprint on the technical reality is the imprint of the unlimited and the infinite, of the apeiron.
Yeah, but there's a distinction. Distinction is this. Does a technical object have a pre-individual reality, or technical object is part of the pre-individual reality?
But what I'm saying is that what you create as a technical reality, as a collective of human beings, the act of creating that leaves an imprint of this act of invention. And what Simondon says is that imprint is the imprint of our human nature, and nature he defines specifically as what is open within us to the pre-individual. And that's a paradox, because if you imprint a stamp on something, you imprint something limited and a form. So what is actually, so this is where this whole thing with mental images becomes complicated, because what human nature does to the technical reality that it creates itself, it leaves an openness in it. A trace of its humanity is the openness of the technical reality that it invents together. And when you take that humanity away, you enslave the technical reality. So no, I'm not saying that.
That's I mean, because for Simondon, he says that when you make the equivalence between nature and the individual reality, or there are some people who argue, like for example, Stigler, like what's the name of it, Jason Reed, where they argue, and I agree that the pre-individual reality should also include culture, technology, and so on and so forth. You know? So the technical reality is a part of this pre-individual reality. If you say that a technical object has a pre-individual reality, it's by saying that there is an individuation of technical object. But that's maybe too technical. I don't want to.
I know now what you mean. So you think that's why one shouldn't talk about transindividuation as if it was the transindividuation of the technical reality. Is that what you're saying?
No. I was just trying to clarify some of the concept. But that's point I just want to really quickly. It's the question of noise, or maybe we can say the question of contingency in Simondon. And there was a certain way, or in your talk, especially when you invoke people like Esposito, and the reference to Simondon, there is one tendency that it's possible to conceive Simondon as a second-order cybernetician, like Luhmann. Esposito comes from Luhmann, and for Luhmann, the genesis of the system depends on contingency. When Luhmann says that that failure is productive for a system, So all the noise, all the kind of errors that is produced, will only beneficial for the process of the system. So that would be direction to think. And if you think in this way, then you will be like Jean-Luc always want to argue that Simondon is actually the first systems theorist in France.
Yeah.
The second way to think, and that I prefer to do, is to argue against this possibility that Simondon is a systems theorist, and that Simondon wanted to move towards even more open.
Yeah, can I say something to that? There's a problem with systems theory as opposed to cybernetics, because I think that Wiener was very anxious about the fascist potentiality of cybernetics and a kind of control society, but the systems theorists were actually fascists. So I think that it's not really a kind of a family tree. I would, if you had to choose one, I think that Simondon's caution of producing a system would sit uneasily with that linear. And also the thing is, I'm not interested in saying, is Simondon a proto second order cybernetician, because actually he's not a cybernetician, because he thinks a certain way and understands Wiener, but he also moves away from that in quite fundamental ways, which is his whole oeuvre, if you like. And I'm more interested in, and perhaps this is where the question of trans-individuation comes from. I'm more interested in what does his thought make possible, and what does it close down? What does it appear to close down on the basis of images that he uses, whereas his thinking is actually more refined? And what does it appear to open, whereas perhaps if you look in the detail, there's certain obstacles that mean you have to bifurcate and go somewhere else. So I think that to a certain extent, perhaps I have a more malleable approach to all these important men, and I kind of take what I think that you don't have to love the whole person, you just have to, be satisfied.
Yeah, so thank you, Cecile. It was very interesting. So I'm going to read your book on notes I haven't yet. But then I approached this question from the history and epistemology of music, right? And it's interesting to note that the kind of transformation of the European Western music on the edge of the 19th and the 20th century is contemporary to the existence of a recording level of music, which is for me incredibly important, because it means that music has reached a level that we should not name it writing, because it's not writing, but it's recording of music, and this is for music a level that has been equally important as the level of writing for speech. Short. I believe that sound, and this is the reason why Schoenberg and other musicians and musicologists were capable to draw the distinction between the sound, being a regular form, in ancient harmony, and noise, and to integrate noise in sound, right? And so, coming from this background, I wonder if you do consider noise in your conception as something that is related to information, and if, obviously you do, right? Everybody does. But then, if noise is in relationship with information, shall you understand this relationship as a disparation? I mean, is noise to be reduced through information? And I would suggest that probably not. And so the question would be, is noise something that is only the level of the individuation of an information through disparation, for instance, right? So noise would be only relational, or do you believe that it's important to take noise as something that is actually a level of indeterminacy in the physical process? I mean, is noise, does noise exist in itself, if I say so? Or is it only the level or the edge of an information being individuated or disindividuated? So this would be the question I would like you to respond to.
Okay. Yeah, it's not possible in its entirety because my brain is brainstorming now. First of all, I have to say two things. What I was most interested in is how other people think noise.
Right.
And the fact that they have the impression that when we all talk about noise in finance, noise in biology, it's such an intuitive concept, it makes it possible for people to talk about it as if they were talking about the same thing. So when you go into detail, no, just a second, I'll get to that. When you go into the detail, you find not only a huge technical divergence in the conceptualization of a notion or an idea, you find that these concepts are trafficked because they need to happen, people work on stuff together and that can make it interesting what kind of cross-fertilization happens there. Also, and this is, for example, with cybernetics more the case than with information theory, and this is perhaps where my personal fascination with noise really started to take off. I thought that Wiener's concept of negentropy, of information as the negation of entropy, was reliant on an entire corpus of thoughts that are intrinsic to the question of information and noise, which is organization, efficiency, value, telos, and various other things. Whereas Shannon's concept, and this is also something I want to say about the history of philosophy, is that I think occasionally, it's more a question of, we talked about this yesterday, I think it's a question of attitude. Occasionally, in whatever discipline, a conceptual gesture happens of tremendous philosophical importance that really belongs in the history of philosophy. So Shannon's concept of information as information entropy, I'm not saying it's the last word on information or even on noise, was of extraordinary philosophical inventiveness for me and really great openness. And the reason why I got so fascinated with this, and to answer your specific question on what my personal take is on noise, is that if I tell you, but the more I repeat this thing, I'm not telling you anything anymore. I'm not giving you information. So the more unpredictable what I say to you is, the more information you have the impression you receive. So, of course, if you're a bit extreme, like me, you'll immediately want to know, so what's the most extreme form of information I could give you? And that's, of course, that would be a concept of absolute noise, which doesn't come from Shannon. That's what happened immediately in my mind when I thought, so how unpredictable may I get? Let me just finish. Then what happens?
The same question. Is it noise?
Is exactly no. The question is this then. In the channel of communication, you have to distinguish between the entropy that is attributed to information and the entropy that is attributed to noise. And you can do that because the engineer who transmits a signal or a message or a radio transmission is given a ready-made information, about which it made me think of Duchamp. Because in principle, who draws the line between what counts and what doesn't count? When, for instance, we discovered the background radiation of the universe, it was discovered as noise in a signal transmission. So that drawing of the line between entropy, which is valued as an uncertainty that we embrace, and the uncertainty that we have to filter out in order to be able to pursue or to track, if you like, something that really that where we have a hunch that there's something that's going to change things for us. That is the adventure of information and noise for me.
Now, is noise on the level of a problematic field? Is noise on the level of a problematic that is not resolved in your heart? Or is noise something that can be described as a proper way of individuation? That is another way of individuation?
No, I can't. I really say either of these two. I mean, I don't know how to respond to that because it's neither of these two.
No, I mean,
for me, in the way I think about it. But it's also, it takes us quite far from Simondon because I was trying to introduce, if you like, the complexity of thinking about information in relation to the challenges that we face nowadays when we try to think noise, rather than I could have prepared also more. Maybe I should reread my book.
Ian first, actually. Sorry, then I'll got a couple at you.
So it's just a point of clarification. It may relate a little bit to what Anne's just been saying. Thank you for such a rich talk. I have loads of questions, but I'll stick to this one. And it may be based on my lack of knowledge of Simondon or how you're using him, but you invoked at one point the distinction between signification, sense, and information. noted.
Oh, is that when he was to say that
You're talking
ultimately
about a philosophical conceptualization of noise, and in that context, you invoke this distinction, this signification.
I guess that's when I was saying that
information.
you would have to force or bend Simondon slightly to make him go in the noise direction, because although there is all this attention to ground and virtuality and margins of indeterminacy, it really ultimately information is that which transduces, which structures, which organizes, which has a sense. So yeah, no, I wasn't saying that
so
signification sense is the same. That wasn't my
No, I
building
suppose
site.
what my interest was what, you know, whether they're three distinct categories. So you've got signification, which clearly is often held different from sense. Whether you had sense as distinct from information.
Yeah, information, actually, sense and information. So my instinctive answer to that from myself, rather than as a Simondon scholar,
that's
would be that that the sense is your tracking of your problematic. So
Right.
it is the necessity that drives you forward to resolve a problematic in a direction that can't be certain in advance because you haven't got the solution yet,
Yeah.
but that drives you a certain way rather than another.
Yeah. So the background, I suppose, to my question is, so in something like the existential phenomenology of Merleau-Ponty, you have sens as a clear category in phenomenology of perception and later works, and sens is very distinct from signification, understood as a relation of signified to signified. It's more diffuse, it's more indeterminate, it's more to do with perception.
Yeah, no, I
qualitative
wouldn't say that. I would
experience.
be
And
ashamed
that's
to
sort of
conflate the
carried
two.
forward into other thinkers, and setting aside Deleuze's logique du sens, which is a whole other thing. So I'm wondering whether sense has a level of sort of indeterminacy, if you like.
That's the same question.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and the answer is yes.
And whether
Ask
sense
like
can be
that,
said
the
to sort
answer
of
is yes.
participate
Sense
in
has a
noise,
level,
or
is
be
absolutely
a
linked to
crossover
the
between
indeterminacy.
signification,
Yes.
information, and noise.
So the answer is yes.
Mhm.
And I also think that to a certain extent the question of signification becomes relevant in the context of a catastrophic reaction. When the openness that you mobilize for whatever process that you're engaging in is overwhelming and risks dissolving whatever certainties you set out with, including who you are, what you are, that you are, I think there is always a risk, and even politically I think you could argue that way, of a catastrophic reaction. And that catastrophic reaction is occasionally, in psychiatry for instance, associated with a flight into meaning. That's how sometimes psychosis is described as a flight into meaning, when people start to say lots of things in order to make sense of a situation that is totally and utterly overwhelming for them. But I think also politically, and in an obsession with arriving at meaning quickly, if you like, I think occasionally there's a risk of this being a symptom of a catastrophic reaction. So I don't know if that...
I've got a couple of questions at the back. I think Megan, Ollie, is it? Yeah. I am aware that we're already kind of running a little bit behind, but I'd love to get your questions. So if we can just kind of keep them quite kind of quick, and then we'll give Cecile a chance to respond, but maybe take them both together. Is that okay?
Just like a brief question. Thanks just to say for a really great presentation. I was just wondering the distinction you made between the idea of knowledge trader and professional and institutional trader. I was just wondering if there was any correlation between this idea of the knowledge trader coming to know the craft of mathematics and computer science and way of engaging with this type of material, and this relationship perhaps to the amateur, or we can define the knowledge trader as a form of an amateur. And I'm thinking here of Bernard Siegel's use of the amateur, maybe there's a way of thinking of knowledge traders.
Yeah, no, exactly. But it's an interesting concept of amateur, because there are often people with university degrees who have, better understanding of the conceptual and mathematical elements of those algorithms that are being used. I'm not saying that there are not also people in finance who also get Nobel Prizes for using mathematics correctly. I would assume that people who work in banks and sell financial products that are based on the stacking of very complex algorithms and that have far-reaching consequences, they have like tentacles that go right around the globe. I don't think that people who trade in these really understand the mathematics that they use in institutional trading necessarily. Some do, and I don't know if they do better or not. The noise traders, by the way, apparently they, over the long run, they have a kind of martingale problem where they kind of have to recover their losses, and they don't tend to, on the whole, apparently do that well. But apart from that, I think this element of tinkering, the fact that there's trust and distrust because they're anonymous, they're known to each other through, I don't know, on the web. They decide to make these temporary alliances where they share information or share algorithms, but they're also competitors. They're clearly not ethically motivated people who try to make the world a better place. They're in it to get money out for themselves. So I thought, that's why I conceived of it, I thought of it as a stress test. I'm not saying this is the future of the trans individual. And I was just thinking that this was an interesting phenomenon that helps us to ask questions about how, also political oversight, regulation. How do you regulate these people? I mean, a lot of it is probably, I don't know, probably studying. But yes, I think the element of amateur rather than professional is what has been thrown at them also for many years.
So the question actually about my question about like really is what what is the reason?
To speak slowly.
Sorry, I felt kind of very maybe.
No, not in a hurry. Otherwise, I don't hear you so well.
Okay, the concept of noise, and the second one, transhuman. So regarding noise, I'd like to clarify like what I have heard from everybody so far. So is that naturally induced noise, or I think you emphasize in a way like a manipulative power or strategy complexity to try to, there is a kind of power to make a noise, or individuals like can provide or like bring about some kind of noise like naturally, like in the kind of system or in the mechanism. So the thing to end, it's like determinacy has to do with agency. So in the middle of like a complexity, which is like induced by noise, so individual needs to set up their own agents of determinacy. That's your idea. That's the part I want to clarify. And regarding transhuman, that idea is really awesome. Like I'm afraid like to say this because like after listening to Yak, I'm afraid of like my understanding of trans-individuality. But I just thought of like Jiang Zhi, like a Chinese scholar who talked about the butterfly tree. So like I think it was a long time ago there was like some human beings awareness like nature is me is nature and all that. So what kind of boundary, like I think you are talking about transhumanism related to technology. So
transhumanism or
transhumanism or kind of boundary between human being and the techniques or technology. So what percent of human beings? So it also reminds me of like the issue of like feminism, like transgender is categorized into woman or not. Like that, I just thought of that kind of issue. What I mean is like some kind of AIs or some kind of like fabricated like the human being now in the future will come to us, and then like what kind of boundary? Like should we take everything? Should we encompass all kind of differences? So the boundary between human beings and technology, are you thinking the direction will be convergence or divergence? So we are going to distinguish ourselves from the technology, or we are going to like converge ourselves with technology.
Okay, I'll give you an example that I think will answer this. When a computer freezes, and when my mind freezes, so I can have a breakdown and the computer can have a breakdown, but the computer doesn't give a shit. But I suffer. So the computer is superior to me in the eye of, in the logic of most wisdoms, cultures of wisdom, because it has greater indifference. In fact, it has absolute indifference. So I think that what is human is the fact that we valorize, and that we make, and our normativity is based on on the values that organize our life. And I think this, until now, I cannot see this happening as a phenomenon that would be totally unrelated to life. That doesn't mean that I can't replace my heart with an artificial heart, or I'm not even sure about the brain. I'm at hardware, wetware. I'm not sure I'm that bothered about this. I'm more really worried about a computer never needs to emancipate itself, not in the sense of the robot that is a myth for Simondon, but we do, we really do. And our emancipation, I think, is taking charge of the openness of the apeiron within us. And when you take charge of this openness, and I think that's the answer to your first question, if I understood it correctly, then you assume the normativity of drawing the line between information and noise as that which is valuable for you to be pursued, as an uncertainty valuable enough to be pursued, and an uncertainty that fades into the background or that you try to eliminate because in that moment it obstructs your quest.
Thank you. Let's join together and thanks Cecile for a wonderful start to the day.